On November 11, 1918, the request for an armistice from Germany, which ended the First World War from the side of France, was accepted by General Ferdinand Foch. Later, after reviewing the conditions of the Versailles Peace Treaty, Foch stated that it was not peace, but a temporary truce for 20 years. The authenticity of the quote was confirmed by Winston Churchill himself. Indeed, the Second World War followed the First, as Foch had predicted. However, considering the events between these two conflicts, the question arises, how did Germany manage to recover so quickly after its defeat in the First World War? This question will be addressed in this video. Let's start with an unusual fact that few people usually remember. Who actually said that Germany suffered more than France in the First World War? Or, for example, on the day the First World War ended, November 11, 1918, the distance from the front line to Paris was just over 200 kilometers, while to Berlin it was almost 900 kilometers. Somehow, the fact that Germany fought the entire war on foreign territory is often forgotten, and in July 1918, it essentially concluded a victorious spring offensive. Yes, it was followed by an even more successful Allied counteroffensive, but that's not the point. The point is that the territory of Germany, ravaged by trench warfare, remained untouched. Just think about the regions where the major battles of the First World War unfolded: the Somme, Ypres, Verdun, Galicia, Jutland, the Marne, Soissons. None of the mentioned areas relate to Germany. Germany could have lost the war in any case, but predominantly non-German territories lay in ruins. The aviation technology of that time did not allow for deep air raids into Germany, and regions like the Rhineland, Silesia, Poznan, as well as many other industrialized areas remained unscathed. Meanwhile, France's industry suffered significant losses, with around 40% of it being seized by Germany by 1914. Resource shortages, blockade, and food shortages were also major issues. However, by 1918, factories were still standing, and despite the economic crisis, people were willing to work for meager wages. Therefore, the question of Germany's recovery after the First World War needs to be examined separately, considering that the conflict inflicted much less damage on the country compared to France. This is where the problems associated with the Treaty of Versailles arise. You've probably heard that this treaty was controversial and aided German revanchists in igniting the flames of the Second World War. However, it's not entirely fair to blame the treaty drafters. In 1945, everything was clear-cut. Germany lay in ruins, and the Allies physically entered Berlin. But in 1918, if you had summoned an alien, they wouldn't have understood which side had actually lost, let alone how to compensate for the damage. On one hand, France, the USA, and Britain aimed to dismantle Germany, imposing reparations on it for the next 500 years. However, who would have had to pay these debts in a torn-apart country? By demanding excessive reparations from Germany, they risked pushing it into complete collapse. On the other hand, by leaving too much intact, they would have created a paradoxical situation where the defeated would feel better off than the victors. Additionally, the USA, by financing Britain and France, essentially ensured that almost all German reparations would have to go overseas. Hence, all the problems of the Versailles Treaty arose from this imbalance. Finding a balance was difficult, and it was the first version of the treaty that inflicted the greatest damage on Germany. Consequently, hyperinflation, massive strikes by Germans who refused to work for France for free, and political instability ensued. Until 1924, the situation was such that Germany, to avoid default, reduced reparations payments. However, France responded to this with threats, and in January 1923, even occupied 7% of the country's territory. Who was right and who was to blame is a debatable question, but the undeniable fact remained. Payments under the Versailles Treaty were being delayed, and more people realized that this could lead either to a new war or to Germany's bankruptcy. France attempted to deal with the situation by demanding that Germany cede the Saar, Rhineland, and Ruhr regions, placing these territories under external control. However, the USA and Britain realized that this would only strengthen partisan movements and resisted these demands. A buffer zone was only created on the eastern side, where Poland received German territories. However, the situation here was not without its challenges, as the absence of a common border between Germany and the USSR stimulated cooperation between the two countries, easing tensions and, according to many historians, even uniting them against a common opponent. The main catalyst for the recovery of Germany's economy was the Dawes Plan. On September 1, 1924, the USA and Britain definitively sidelined France from deciding on German reparations and restructured the payment system, adapting it to the capabilities of the German economy, which was then the Weimar Republic. Additionally, they provided loans for the country's development. These measures accelerated the repayment of reparations, and the results were not long in coming. By 1923, the German economy had taken off. The volume of industrial production in 1927 reached 122% of the 1913 level, and unemployment fell almost to zero. GDP growth was measured in three-digit figures. Despite territorial losses in 1928, the income of the German population exceeded the pre-war level by a quarter, and the economy was growing faster than in France and Britain. Regarding the USSR, in 1922, the Rapallo Treaty was concluded between the Soviet authorities and the Weimar Republic. According to its terms, the countries made concessions to each other to normalize relations. They forgave debts, nationalized enterprises, and so on. For the USSR and Germany, this was the first equal and humane international treaty since the war. This step had a significant impact on both economies and the self-awareness of the inhabitants of both countries. In general, by the late 1920s, Germany's economy had returned to a level commensurate with European standards, primarily thanks to loans from the United States. However, when the Great Depression hit America, Germans suffered almost as severely as everyone else. GDP declined, incomes shrank, and, of course, fragile political stability was compromised. This paved the way for an Austrian artist to rise to power, often credited with all the merits of rebuilding the country. In reality, 80% of the foundation had been laid by the Weimar Republic, with the remaining 20% attributable to Keynesian policies. From 1933 to 1939, the government's total revenues amounted to 62 billion marks, while expenditures reached 101 billion marks. This resulted in a huge budget deficit, but few were concerned about it. Hitler openly stated that this debt would be repaid through territorial conquest. This is where the essence of the economic strategy lies. However, the situation with the army was more complicated. According to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany's army was supposed to remain limited in size. So where did it come from in 1939? Indeed, the situation with the army after World War I was much more complex than it seemed at first glance. On paper, the German army was limited in both quantity and quality of equipment, but in practice, discharged officers continued to engage in military activities. As early as 1923, 10 years before Hitler came to power, the aviation inspection was established, ensuring that military pilots were trained on passenger planes rather than combat aircraft. By the end of 1923, Fokker D fighters were secretly procured in the Netherlands for pilot training. In 1924, collaborative efforts with the USSR began, with German military pilots traveling to Lipetsk as tourists, where an aviation school with Fokkers was clandestinely established. Similar secret schools were set up for German tank crews in Kazan and Khimki in Volga. However, it is important not to overstate their significance. For example, only 220 German pilots graduated from the Lipetsk Aviation School, while there were over 2,000 from the secret brown shirt school in Germany. In general, it can be said that the foundation of the Wehrmacht of 1939 was created within Germany itself, albeit unofficially. That's why when Hitler came to power and military cooperation with the USSR ceased, Germany didn't feel any significant changes. Just like with the economy, the foundation with the army was laid by the Weimar Republic. For instance, Walter Dornberger received an order in 1930 to create a rocket using liquid fuel. His designs later became the basis for the military V-2 rocket. The civilian airline Lufthansa, according to documents, suffered huge losses and logically should have been shut down by the government. However, this didn't happen because Lufthansa was training future Luftwaffe pilots using civilian aircraft. Heinz Guderian, the creator of the Blitzkrieg strategy and one of the most successful officers of the Wehrmacht, began practicing tank tactics as early as 1919 on the Polish border, using trucks. It wasn't until 1929 that he first sat behind the wheel of a tank. Militarization in Germany was in full swing and did not stop even during the calmest periods of the Weimar Republic. Many believe that it was precisely the secrecy and lack of technology that prompted German generals and engineers to seek original ways of conducting military operations, ultimately leading to the development of Blitzkrieg, rockets, and the nuclear program. Karl von Ossietzky, a German journalist, published a series of articles in 1931 exposing the secret militarization of Germany by the government. For this, he faced persecution from both the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich. In 1933, Karl von Ossietzky was sent to a concentration camp, and the Nobel Peace Prize he received in 1935 did not make his life any easier. He died in 1938. Almost 5 years before that, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations, officially announced the creation of the Luftwaffe, and completely lifted the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Then, as mentioned earlier, there was total militarization of the economy through borrowing and budget deficits, which was planned to be rectified by war. Thus, Germany recovered after World War I. First, there was the strange Versailles Peace, full of contradictions and the inability of allies to agree, then a compliant Germany and the Dawes Plan. And then Hitler came, and the economy was put into full gear, directing it into a military course. Thank you, dear friends, for joining me on this fascinating journey through history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos about exciting events and facts from the past. Also, leave your comments below this video. I'm always happy to hear your thoughts, suggestions, and requests for topics for future videos. See you all again on the channel.